You're listening to The Central Cast, a podcast for mystics and misfits just like you. The Central Cast is recorded before a live audience every week at our church in Glendale, California. Thanks for tuning in.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. Good to see familiar faces. I want to begin today with a humorous story. We need a little bit of levity these days. And this one comes from the LA Zoo, of all places. I think it's true. I did my best to research it. It appears to be accurate, my friends. The chimpanzees at the LA Zoo have an alpha male named Glenn in their troop, as all chimpanzee troops do, I'm told. Glenn is it's considered a good alpha male. Sorry to use the term alpha male, but such are chimpanzees. He's brought a lot of stability to the troop at the LA Zoo. So much so that another zoo, I don't know where exactly, didn't have, I guess, a really good alpha in the group. And so they asked the LA Zoo if they could borrow or get Glenn. And the LA Zoo said, sure. But they had to figure out a way to get him out of the LA Zoo troop without traumatizing the other chimps. So they devised this, because if they just disappeared him in the middle of the night, the chimps are extremely intelligent. They would freak out. Where the hell is Glenn? And so they decided, here's what we're going to do. We're going to tranquilize him and let him be found by the other chimps unconscious and unable to be roused so that they would think he's dead. And this is exactly what happened. They had a little chimp funeral for him. Glenn's dead by Glenn. And they transferred him to the other zoo. Things did not go well there for him. So they decided, okay, Glenn's got to go back. And so they brought him back to the LA Zoo and just put him back with the other chimps. And they went ape. Literally, they lost their mind because Glenn was back from the dead. And he's now the Jesus of the chimpanzees at the LA Zoo. I'd like to believe they've got a concept of the afterlife, or that Glenn is the Messiah. And I love that his name's Glenn. It's a fun story. I think it's true. I don't trust the internet, but whatever. The point is, everybody loves a good resurrection story, right? Even chimps apparently. But of course we do too. And it's the reason why I think the story of Jesus' resurrection has been so compelling for so many over the ages, and certainly early on in the development of the faith. I can't tell you how many Christians I've met over the years who have made the argument that the resurrection is the most important thing about Christianity, and that the faith is utterly meaningless without it. Have you heard this before? Have you heard people say this before? They'll usually quote the Apostle Paul from 1 Corinthians 15, where Paul says, and I quote, "If the dead are not raised, as some of you claim," there were those in the early church that did not believe the dead could be raised. They might have still believed Jesus was raised, but they had doubts about human resurrections in general. But nevertheless, Paul writes to them, if the dead are not raised, then Christ has not been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, then you are still dead in your sins, and your faith has been in vain. And with this, Christians love to argue, unless you believe Jesus' resurrection was literal, historical, and physical, then you're, first of all, not a Christian. But second of all, you have made the faith utterly meaningless, which is like an astonishing thing to say, because it basically is an argument saying Jesus' teachings, his life example, his execution at the hands of the state, it's all meaningless. It's all nonsense. It's all meaningless, which is an astonishing thing to say and a dumb thing to say, in my estimation. But this is what people say. In general, conservatives and so-called traditional Christians, including evangelicals, of course, they tend to be more otherworldly, right? They tend to be more focused on the resurrection and the afterlife and all things supernatural. We know this. Whereas us so-called liberals and progressives, post-evangelicals, we tend to be more focused on the teachings of Christ, his virtues, his values, his life example, his sacrificial, compassionate way of living and being, and of course his execution at the hands of the state with the support of the religious leaders, right? This is profoundly meaningful to us. And the reasons for this disparity between progressives and conservative Christians are many, but it tends to correlate pretty strongly to one's level of education and according to socioeconomic factors. Okay. What about the early church? What about the first Christians, these first century Christians? What did they value most about the faith? What did they emphasize the most? How did they see this matter? Were they more focused on the teachings of Christ and the social implications of his story, the social political aspect, or were they more focused on the supernatural aspects of his story, right? The miracles, the resurrection, the glorification of Christ. Did they think the resurrection was the main thing, like so many Christians do today? It's hard to say. It's hard to say. But I think a good argument can be made, a strong argument can be made, that they did in fact focus most on the resurrection and the afterlife, and probably for multiple reasons. Keep in mind that the early church, first century Christians, seemed to believe that they were living at the end of the age. There's lots of evidence they believe that the second coming, the end of the age, the so-called messianic age, the end of history, including the resurrection and the judgment of the living and the dead, was upon them. And it would happen probably in their lifetimes. There's good evidence that they believe in this kind of imminence. And for that reason alone, I think that they highly prioritized or were preoccupied with the notion of the resurrection and the afterlife and life in the world to come. There's good evidence for this. But to be clear, I don't think they understood the resurrection the way that evangelicals do today. I don't think they understood the resurrection as detached from the rest of the gospel about caring for the poor and the powerless and creating communities that were radically egalitarian for their day and time. I think they understood the resurrection as part of not just Christ's resurrection, but their own future resurrection. I think they understood that as part of God's grand redemptive plan for all of history, for all of humanity, especially for the poor and powerless, who had more reason than anyone to look forward to a blissful afterlife, seeing as how much they suffered in this life at the hands of the rich and the powerful. Does that make sense? So unlike many evangelicals today, the early church's understanding of the resurrection was not detached from their concepts of, the social gospel or social justice and God's work therein, but it was part and parcel to that. The early church seemed to believe that the afterlife was where God will finally, once and for all, liberate the oppressed, vindicate the poor and powerless, and judge the rich and the powerful. The second coming for them was like the ultimate upending, reversal of the world's power dynamics. This was where they believed the rulers and authorities, the so-called principalities and powers of this world, including, of course, Rome, perhaps Rome most of all, if you read the book of Revelation. This is where they believed that the rulers and authorities of this world, the oppressive, unjust, cruel authorities of this world will be finally judged, brought low, punished, destroyed by a triumphant Christ. Hey, this is how they understood the afterlife, the resurrection, probably. I'm not one of them, so I'm speaking out of a place of education, but and the evidence at hand, right? Their understanding of the afterlife and the resurrection was not, again, detached from Jesus' teachings about social justice, but the full realization of it. I mean, consider Jesus' famous parable of the rich man and Lazarus. Many of you have heard this one before, right? What's the point of that parable? The rich man goes to Hades and Lazarus goes to paradise simply based on the fact that Lazarus received terrible things in this life. He was mistreated as a poor beggar outside the rich man's gate. And the rich man refused to even share the crumbs of his table with this man. He was sent to Hades. Lazarus sent to paradise. For this reason alone. This is how the early church, early Christians understood resurrection, afterlife. Evangelicals have no similarities with that at all. They do not see it in any way as having to do with social justice or God upending the power dynamics of this world and, settling the hash once and for all with the rich and powerful. Evangelicals do not understand the resurrection and the afterlife as having anything to do with God upending the dominant power structures of this world, which of course are that of white supremacy and capitalism, which they represent. They don't see the resurrection and second coming as the end of their power and privilege, but the ultimate validation and enhancement of it, whereby God will give even more power to them, right? Even more wealth to them, even more privilege and comfort to them. Those who live in mansions and gated communities now will inherit even bigger mansions on streets of gold in the sweet by and by, they believe. Those who have power and privilege now are going to be given crowns of glory in the world to come, they believe, right? This is their understanding of the resurrection and the afterlife. It has nothing to do with flipping the script on hegemony and the upending of the dominant power structures of our world, because they are the dominant power structures of our world. Why would they believe that God's coming to, humble them and exalt the poor and powerless? Why would they believe that? And of course they wouldn't. I think someone's here. Now, in this way, modern evangelicals do not really share anything common with first century Christians and their understanding of the resurrection. However, they do share in common this preoccupation with it. I would say that, and this belief that Christianity is really mostly about the resurrection and the afterlife. But we don't have that focus here, do we? How often do you hear me talk about the resurrection? How often do you hear me preach the afterlife and how happy we should all be that we're going to heaven when we die, and how you can relax because everything will be fine up there? We never talk about that here, right? Because we're liberals. Because we're liberal Christians. We're post-evangelical, right? Let the redeemed of the Lord say so. We've been set free from that, all right? That's how I feel about it. And I'm so glad this is who we are, because here's the thing. The more one focuses on otherworldly things like resurrections and the supernatural and the afterlife and the second coming, the more one does that, the more one lives in an alternate reality. And that's a problem. Because the more one lives in an alternate reality, the more one neglects their responsibilities in this one, meaning their social responsibilities. Namely, we had a saying in my church growing up. I grew up, solid evangelical, even fundamentalist Pentecostal. But we had a saying, don't be so heavenly minded that you're of no earthly good, which nobody really abided by. Because we were so heavenly minded, we were of no earthly good. But you get the point. I mean, that was supposed to be like a corrective in that extremely heavenly minded, so to speak, community, spiritual community. People had their head in the clouds. They lived in an alternate reality. I was one of them. And that's a problem. But there's other problems with it too. Did any of you see on social media over the last week or two this meme that went around saying that, what will the left do if Charlie Kirk rises from the dead in 3 days? Did you see that one? I think Bob might have it. There it is. Can you read that? There it is. Wow. Right. Yeah. No, I'm not, to be clear, I'm not mocking their grief. This has nothing to do with their grief. This is about the deification of a white supremacist and hate monger, and the fact that numerous evangelicals were actually praying that God would raise him from the dead just to own the libs. What will the left do if God raises Charlie? This is where we're at. This is where we are at as a culture. I am not making this up. And many evangelicals were praying that God would actually just do that he would raise Charlie from the grave. This is where we're at. And it's a perfect example of the level of insanity evangelicals have reached. And it's not hard to understand how we got here. I firmly believe that the political, we'll call it hellscape, that we're living in is in no small way the direct result of millions, tens of millions of Americans being taught that magical thinking, faith and belief supersedes facts, critical thinking, and objective reality. How else do we explain why so many Christians cannot see a difference between Charlie Kirk and Jesus of Nazareth? It's astonishing. How else do we explain why so many Christians have become convinced that things like empathy and compassion, hallmarks of Jesus's character, are not only not hallmarks of Jesus's character, but are in fact bad and even evil? I mean, Charlie Kirk himself renounced empathy. He said this, and I quote, "I can't stand the word empathy. I think it's a made-up New Age term that does a lot of damage," end quote. This is astonishing. Let's really take that in. And this person is being deified practically, held up as a paragon of Christian faith and values. What could possibly explain the level of this nonsense? How did we get here? I think what we are witnessing today among evangelicals and the larger right goes beyond just normal tribalism, normal, cognitive bias and groupthink. I think we have crossed a threshold, and what we're witnessing is a kind of religion-induced psychosis. I didn't come up with that term. I don't know who did. Religion-induced psychosis, or RIP, which is a perfect acronym if I've ever heard. Religion-induced psychosis is a lot like AI-induced psychosis. Has anyone ever heard of, that's a pretty recent term, AI-induced psychosis? Very similar. AI-induced psychosis is the result of losing touch with reality by spending too much time conversing with an AI chatbot, which can distort reality because it's like talking to a real person, but it's not a real person, right? A real person who validates your thinking as part of its programming to keep the conversation going. And so if you're prone to conspiratorial thinking, grandiose beliefs, paranoia, it's going to enhance and validate that as well. Some people have believed that they're talking to God, or that God is using the AI chatbot to communicate special messages just for them, right? Special insights. AI-induced psychosis is real, but so is religion-induced psychosis, and they kind of work the same. In religion-induced psychosis, the so-called AI chatbot is your pastor, your church, the Bible, or your concept of God that validates and enhances your magical thinking, your grandiose beliefs, your paranoia, your xenophobia, your conspiratorial thinking, etc., etc. It distorts reality so much that people lose the ability to distinguish between opinions and facts, science and pseudoscience, lies and truth. To the degree that there are millions, tens of millions of Americans today who cannot see that they have signed off on fascism and lawlessness and authoritarian rule and the end of democracy, and have done so in the name of God and making America Christian again and all that nonsense. They can't see it. They're blind to it. They're in a cult. This is religion-induced psychosis. I don't know about you, but I feel like I'm losing my mind watching them lose theirs. It's like, just watching them fall for the most obvious con in history. It's so obvious. It's like, you know what it's like? It's like watching your grandparents fall for the Nigerian prince email scam, and you just want to pull your hair out. At least with them, you could blame their age. But we're talking about tens of million American adults who are literally caught up in this magical thinking, and it's astonishing. You want to pull your hair out if you're paying attention. We are talking about tens of millions of adults who have lost the ability to think or to see what's happening right in front of their eyes. We are witnessing an episode of mass psychosis or mass hysteria, really. And I think we've crossed the threshold from normal groupthink and cognitive bias, which everyone suffers from, including me. We're all guilty of that to some degree or another. And we've crossed that threshold and entered into a kind of mass psychosis, mass hysteria. And I blame, not entirely, but mostly, the outsized influence that evangelicalism and Christian fundamentalism has had in our culture, and how it's infused so much magical thinking and a kind of faith-based epistemology into the culture. Whatever you believe to be true is true. And to be clear, this is a uniquely right-wing problem. I am not saying the left is devoid of hypocrisy or groupthink or bias, because obviously it's not. But you can't compare it to what's happening on the right because of the influence of religious fundamentalism, aka evangelicalism. The bottom line is the left doesn't have a religion problem. The right does. The left doesn't have a magical thinking problem. The right does, because of evangelicalism's outsized influence on their worldview and their epistemology. I want to finish today by clarifying what I'm not saying. I am not saying that if you believe in anything supernatural as the resurrection, you are crazy and are going to become a fascist. I think you probably know that's not what I'm saying, but it needs to be said. There's a lot of nuance in what I'm saying here. I'm not trying to tell you what to believe, but how to believe or how to hold your beliefs, whatever they may be. Simply being able to say, these are my beliefs. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm open to change. I'm open-minded. I'm open to other perspectives, and I'm not going to believe my beliefs so much that I lose touch with reality. That's huge, right? Maybe that's the point. Believe your beliefs. Good. Believe your beliefs. Just don't believe them too much. Maybe that becomes a problem. Believe your beliefs. Just don't believe them too much. Hold on to them in a honest way. Being able to say, maybe I'm wrong. This is what I think. This is what I believe, but maybe I'm wrong. That's huge. That is huge. Lots of people cannot do that, especially in the Christian world, because you're taught that you got to be certain, or you're doomed, or you're not a real Christian, or whatever. That's how we got here. Magical thinking, faith-based epistemologies, right? Not being able to parse fact from fiction, objectivity from subjectivity, right? That's how we got here. That's why this place is a place of healing and kind of detox, growing up in that cult. But we haven't left the cult because we're literally living in a nation now that's caught up in the cult. I feel like I'm a hostage. I can't leave the compound. It's terrible. Many of you feel the same way. But simply being able to say, this is what I believe, this is what I think, but I might be wrong, is really the difference between having psychosis and not having psychosis sometimes. I don't mean to flatline or say this is only what psychosis is, but you see what I'm saying, maybe. This is the difference between having a healthy or unhealthy belief system. I'm not ashamed to admit that I have some beliefs that probably some of you will think are weird. Maybe Aaron's a little crazy. I'm really into UFOs. It's cool to laugh. I don't care if you laugh at me. I've been into UFOs for like 20 years. Yeah. And Jason, guilty. Sorry to out you. We have fevered text exchanges in the middle of the night. Did you see what just dropped? I believe that there's probably a non-human intelligence among us. Put on my tinfoil hat, right? I think there's evidence for this. Might I be wrong? Absolutely. Might I be a little weird? Sure. I like that. I'm cool with that. So what? See the difference? And I also realize, I'll even go further. I'll say this. I realize there's a lot of nonsense and bullshit in the UFO field. I do. There's a lot of fraud. Such is the case with every field that delves into the paranormal and the esoteric and the spiritual. Religion too, right? But so what? The fact is, human beings have always believed in weird and strange things because being human is kind of weird and strange. Being aware, being alive, being in this body. What are bodies? What the hell is this? Being conscious? What? It's weird. Human existence? It's weird and strange. So don't be ashamed of your weirdness. Don't be ashamed of your weird beliefs, whatever they may be. And I hope you have some. Maybe the resurrection's your thing. I don't know. That's cool. Do that. Have some weird beliefs, but hold them in a healthy way, right? Life is more interesting this way. Let's hold them with a great deal of humility and open-mindedness, because that's healthy. All right? Okay. There's my talk for this morning. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, we want to open the floor. Comments, questions, disagreements, thoughts, remarks. What did this spark for you? What's your views on the resurrection? Or aliens, UFO, anything. What beliefs do you hold on to still? Anything like that. Or maybe you want to talk about Charlie Kirk. Maybe you want to talk about what's going on. Maybe you want to talk about religion-induced psychosis. I don't know. Want to lament? Yeah, Deb.
Yeah, not about the resurrection.
Not about
the resurrection.
Okay.
For better or for worse, I listened to a lot of podcasts this week about Jimmy Kimmel and about the response from the government saying, well, there's dangerous left-wing groups out there that we have to stop. And I had a little bit of an existential crisis because
That'll do it.
The media, this was the New York Times podcast, was trying to be so balanced that I was like, wait, am I wrong?
Yeah.
And then I had to go, oh, wait, no, there's truth out there. Hold on a second. But I was like, wait, why do I believe this? Where's the facts? Where's the knowledge? It really like spun me out for a minute of like, wait a second. Wait.
Yeah.
Am I wrong? Are they right? Wait, no. Okay. Because there are lies
Yes.
out there.
You felt,
And
it sounds like you felt a little gaslit, maybe. You were like second guessing your own sanity or
yeah,
yeah.
Absolutely. And that was scary because I try to stay away from the news as much as possible. But I went down that rabbit hole this weekend.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, if I can be taken down, oh no.
Yeah.
I feel myself a rather grounded person. So
yeah,
that was terrifying.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Thank you for sharing that experience. I think a lot of us have had that experience recently. Find myself second questioning or second guessing. Thank you. Second guessing myself. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Jason.
When I was probably 8 or 9, I grew up in a Pentecostal, pretty insulated environment. Went to a private Christian school, like 200 kids in it, K through 12. And we went to a Young Earth conference and lots of interesting stuff talking about, evidence, quote unquote, for the Earth only being 5,000 years old or something like that. 10, I forget, 7,000 years old? Something
Depends
like
on who you talk to. 6,000, I think, is the number they tend to go with.
And, like dinosaurs and humans lived together. There was a giant ice bubble around the Earth for a while, all kinds of stuff. But I do remember one moment in that conference where I actually entertained the idea that it could be true.
Mm.
And I remember the feeling really well. Like the holy shit, what if this is true? Fear? Because if that was true, then all the other stuff, like hell and sin and resurrection and all these other magical thinking things, like everything in the Bible, right? Because they really focused it on like the reason we know that it's only 7,000 years old or was ever is because of these timelines in the Bible, and you could like map it out by this guy lived 1,000 years and this guy lived 500 years and this guy lived whatever. If it was all true and the Bible was actually true, how frightening that was for me. But I could totally, and like I said, it's like a core memory now. I can totally remember what it was like to flip my brain into believing for a second. And it really felt like it could change my entire worldview about everything. So I guess I'm just saying, you rephrase it as like religious-induced psychosis. That's probably a good term for it, but it's also, I guess, transformational. Like, I can see how once you've made that switch, how it'd be so hard to get back, because it's your whole, everything has changed. It's like an awakening almost into a thing. So it's, serious business.
It is serious business. And in a weird way, it can kind of make you almost compassionate for those who are caught up in it. Because it's like, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And I grew up in that world. If anybody understands it, it's you and me, But nevertheless, you got to fight it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah. Julie.
I've just been thinking about how Christians care so much about belief. And that may sound obvious and stupid, but
No.
I'm getting somewhere. So I have been teaching a Jewish chaplaincy student from Massachusetts. doing like independent studies because she wants to learn about Christianity. And one of the first, I think she read like all the Gospels before our first meeting. And literally her first words were, "Why do you all care so much about what people believe? Who cares what you believe? God doesn't care what you believe. God cares what you do." And so that blew me away because I had my own critiques of the things that Christians believed and the ways that they believed. But it was such an amazing reset to get this perspective from totally outside the faith, who was genuinely confused. Why would God care what's in your mind? God cares how you treat people. And it's such a difference between Christianity and Judaism to a large extent, Buddhism as well. Those are practice-based traditions. And so I think I thought of this, Deb, because that I felt gaslit too this week. And I was like, wait, Charlie Kirk had a compassionate interaction with a trans person? Wait, Charlie Kirk was a nice young man? Like, and when I get to that point where I'm like, I don't know where the truth is in terms of what to believe, I retreat from that into, I know how to treat people. I know how I'm being called to treat people. And it's like a little bit of a relief for me.
Oh yeah, the tyranny of belief. The tyranny of belief. Yeah.
Because belief doesn't necessarily relate to how we treat people. And sometimes we can get so, or for sure, this psychosis that you're talking about is partly marked by people who are so bound up in what they believe that they think nothing about how they treat people, which is part of, I think, what we're seeing is it's these people wrapped up in the cult and the psychosis are so intent on enforcing what they believe that they're not thinking about love and compassion and justice and just how we treat one another day to day.
Yeah, I mean, and just to speak to that, our friend Rollins loves to say, and I've said this numerous times myself, what you believe lives in your actions, not in your head.
Yeah.
What you believe, where your values actually lie, they live in your actions. They don't live in your head. Because we're so good at fooling ourselves and believing into thinking we believe in things that we don't. Right? We're so good at fooling, I believe this and I believe that. But then you look at actually how you live. No, you don't. And Pete also loves telling this story, and I'll be brief, about this wonderful German politician from Austria who was featured in Homes and Gardens magazine in 1939. Homes and Gardens went out there and featured his beautiful Bavarian home and him in it, and how luxurious it was, and how he had his own watercolors up on the wall. He was a deeply sensitive man, never drank alcohol, was a vegetarian. He would take the local kids out for long walks in the Black Forest. He raised Alsatian, German shepherds, was a kind of a humanitarian, sensitive artist type. This is, of course, Adolf Hitler, right? And a few months before he launched, blitzkrieg into Poland, right? The truth of who Hitler was didn't live in how he treated his friends and his immediate neighbors and people he liked, right? I'm sure he was a wonderful person if you knew him personally and hung out at his house in Bavaria and he liked you. I'm sure he was a great guy. So what? The truth of who he was is hidden in, his actions and the chorus of his life. You want to put it that way. Like, what is the fruit? What is the fruit of this person's life? Did they sow goodness and peace and love and unity? And did they bring people together and fight that for everyone's rights and that everyone should have, equality and standing? Or did this person create violence and war and division and hate? When I look at someone like Charlie Kirk, and I do not mean to juxtapose him with the mustache man from Austria, but my point in saying it is, like, even this morning, I had someone from back east, my old boss from Nashville, who's a really nice evangelical man. He's texting me videos of Kirk saying, really nice things about a gay person once, being like, look, he was really a great guy. And I'm like, oh my God, what is the course of this man's life? What is the course? You have 95% of the LGBT community who knew his work would not say that he was a force for their humanization or their equality. People of color are not. Yeah, sure, you can find maybe 1 out of every 10, 1 out of every 20 people of color to say, oh, Charlie was a great guy and was not racist. But 95% of them are going to say, no, he was really kind of racially insensitive and frankly, pretty white supremacist. I can go online right now and find people with a PhD who argue that the earth is flat or that the world is 6,000 years old, right, Jason? You can go online and find people with PhDs, but 95% of the experts are not going to agree with that. So again, this is like critical thinking one-on-one. This is critical thinking one-on-one. And lots of people just don't get it. Anyway, I kind of went on a tangent there. Sorry. I get passionate and excited. Go ahead, Abe. I'm me off. You're not cutting me off.
I'm going to turn that on its head a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it kind of will shed some light on kind of a certain perverse sort of incentive structure that is sort of embedded in kind of the information landscape that we all live in. And I really think Charlie Kirk is actually kind of a good example of it. And this is not to, I kind of find his public work and his work in politics to be almost totally indefensible in terms of its ideology. And in my opinion, his political work and his public life made the country a worse place. That's just made the world a worse place, But when we think about him as a person, to me, he really illustrates well this sort of like perverse incentive to get in front of a microphone and for the purposes of money and the acquisition of power in the form of just followers and people that listen to you and which can be translated into political power, the incentive structure to just say things that are emotionally charged, that push the boundaries of truth and fiction, and say things that are purposefully inflammatory, that purposefully trigger the libs, that even the people that are purveying these lies, in some cases, I think it's an open question whether they even believe them or not, And I look at a person like Charlie Kirk and I think, it's like, I think in his own kind of deceived way, he was a sincere Christian, a sincere evangelical Christian, in my view, when I look at his life. But I look at this person who, it's like he spent his life chasing clout, online clout, and he was willing to, there was no sense of virtue or morality about the truth in him to prevent him from just saying anything that could just rile up conservative America and religious and his sort of audience, because that translated into money and it translated into political clout, and then however he conducted himself in his private life, I think it's very likely that he had perfectly normal friendships with a black friend, with some gay friends, whatever else, because it's like, that didn't serve the that doesn't, that doesn't undermine if it's private and doesn't, isn't common knowledge among the people that he's among his audience, that it doesn't really undermine what his actual goal is, which is to, make money and to acquire political power. Maybe he had ambitions to run for office someday at some point. That's certainly possible. But again, it's like, I see the type of person that Charlie Kirk was is the type of person that really is thriving in this world that we've created, where we have these, I kind of tie in like, I am very negative about social media as a technology, so. I think every human being on earth would benefit by not spending as much time on social media. And again, I think it's because there is this financial incentive structure that is just is absolutely completely encompasses our lives, that financially benefits from emotional engagement and outrage engagement. And that really is, I think, particularly horrible on the political right, and I think it's found particularly like fertile soil in religious America because, again, it's like as you were illustrating today, it's like they've been in churches and in this kind of environment of magical emotional thinking, emotionally led thinking, and so I think it became particularly fertile in those communities, but it is affecting us all, and I don't know, I just kind of I find it useful to think about even people like Charlie Kirk in that way. That, in my opinion, amoral as he was, and as negative impact on the world as his life had, in my opinion, he's still kind of emblematic of what's happening to the entire human race right now with the explosion of these technologies and the kind of change that it has brought about in human thinking, So anyway, I just wanted to kind of expand on some of those ideas.
And I hear you saying in some ways he's maybe the symptom of or the result of kind of what's happening, especially online and social media communities, and the ability for folks to harness that, like you were talking about.
Yeah.
I wonder how much traction we've gotten without the internet.
Yeah, I think it's also important to remember that it's like because it's the environment that's creating people like this.
Okay,
it's not like our problems aren't going to be magically over when when is old age going to finally take Donald Trump? And then finally we'll get past this. Maybe it'll get better. Maybe I don't know, but in my view, these people have been brought to the fore and been and benefited by a whole environment that we are still not really grappling with and not really properly understanding. And until we do that collectively as as a planet, in some ways, it's just going to be another person. It's just going to be somebody else that our collective, we collectively elevate into these roles.
Yeah. I agree with you. I do wonder how much social media has been responsible for the extremism that we've seen in the last 10 years and how much it's fomented that on the right, on the left and the right. But we're talking about the right mostly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No,
I do wonder, because I'm pointing towards religion-induced psychosis, not entirely, but I wonder how much of this is being driven by the kind of echo chamber bubble, living in the outrage state of constant outrage for both the left and the right, but we're talking about the right mostly. How much that has been the cause what we're seeing today as well. It's not just religion-induced psychosis; it's also the algorithm.
Yeah. That's why I kind of brought the metaphor of like just sort of there's, this effect, I guess we could call it, is just, I think, found very fertile soil in religious people.
Yes.
People that are generally more belief driven, and faith driven. They have an emotional attachment to a certain worldview. And I think that echo chamber effect, I think just is much more kind of like, and also like the flourishing conspiracy theories and, anti-vax sentiment and all that kind of stuff, all of which is like, you can find that stuff on the left as well, and that's, one thing about the second term that's so odd is sort of this weird, sort of looping back of some, people that were traditionally sort of loopy, weird, left-wing anti-vax people, that have suddenly gotten, roped into the Make America Healthy Again movement, But anyway, it's still, it's where these kind of ideas and the types of people that these ideas can just more readily flourish, and I think for a community like this, which doesn't hold religion particularly closely, I mean, anybody in this room going to die for your Christianity? Anybody willing to be executed if someone asks you to deny your Christianity?
Yeah, right.
Or be executed, literally put against the wall and shot to death? Would anyone in this room, take that? So we hold it loosely, we hold our value system loosely, but for people that don't, that have a much deeper emotional connection to it, and maybe are willing to die, for their faith in God, I think these kinds of emotional appeals and kind of like populist appeals and this more like emotionally based thinking that's just, I don't know, just sort of broken out over the last 10 to 15 years and become just so pervasive. I think it's just found particularly fertile soil in those communities, and it's just an incredibly powerful force over their minds, and very easily wielded by whoever can kind of rise to the top of the whose information can be shared most readily on social media, on TikTok, on whatever it happens to be.
Yeah. Thank you. Other thoughts today? Yeah, Anne, and then Max.
So I know a number of close people in my family and friends who fit this model of, in their real life, they are kind, generous, caring people. Not social justice in the way we necessarily think of it in a systemic way, but in an individual way.
Yeah.
When there's my family in Texas, when there's a flood in their area, I have a cousin who's the first one, community organizing, telling people where the diapers are and where the shelters are, and getting things delivered places. Like, she's actively involved. I was just talking to a friend this week about a mutual friend who we can't understand why he can't see, because he's very far right politically. But then I was telling her, but I feel like who he really is the person that we know, who's kind and generous and thoughtful and gives and cares about people and has a diverse group of friends, both politically somewhat, but largely politically too, but racially, sexual orientation, like he's got all of those things in his real life. But in his belief system, in his thought life, he's got these other views that he enacts by his voting. And it's like two people in one body. And she can have some political conversations with him. I can't have any political conversations with him again. And we've agreed, like, that's not good for our relationship. So let's just leave it at that. But I'm curious if anybody has any thoughts, though, on, and I don't know that there's even an answer, on how you help someone in that position see the split in themselves. Like, their identity is so caught up in this belief system, their psychological identity. Their actions are saying something else. And I wish I could, somehow let them see that. And I don't know that there's a way.
They often have to discover it themselves through a personal relationship that opens up the contradiction, that exposes it to them on that level.
And that's so rough, because this particular person has lost important relationships in their family, in their lives, because of this dichotomy in themselves. And it wasn't enough.
In general, it has to be a lived life experience with stuff in relationship with others who are on that other side, who are LGBTQ or African American, somebody in their life suffering as a result of their social identity. That usually is what it takes, Anne. I'm sorry.
It hasn't been enough. Tragic.
Yeah. Thank you. Max, and then we'll conclude.
I'll make it real quick. I was just going to say, not as a both sides kind of thing, but
I know you're not Mr. Both Sides.
Well, maybe not everyone else does. That liberalism and progressives can engage in magical thinking too. I think it's a different kind. Like, for example, especially these days, the kind of faith in the system or norms and the things that we kind of tell ourselves is holding everything together.
Checks and balances.
Yeah, right. And there's good reason for some of it that we've been taught, but I think progressives can fall prey to magical thinking, just not with religion, like in our own social constructs and our own political constructs. So just as a self-warning for us all, like to notice where those places are that magical thinking can take us into this in place that we kind of get detached from reality in a little bit, and we use it to justify either our actions or inactions for better or worse. That's really
That's helpful.
rise up. No, I'm just kidding.
No, it's good. I like the critical self-reflection there a little bit. That's really good. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for participating and being here. Let's hang out, talk for more if you want, have some coffee or something. But thanks so much. Next week, obviously, we're not here. Dinner time, right? So hopefully see you there. Thanks. Oh, benediction time, my friends. All right, let's say this together now. As we go from this place, commit ourselves to the path of love, honesty, and humility. Dedicate ourselves as Christ did to the cause of justice and the greatest embrace of this life, this world, and each. Thank you. Thank you, Deb. Thanks for listening in on this week's edition of the Central Cast. Hope you enjoyed it and hope you join us next time. Bye-bye.